Well, hello. I've now finished filming Series 18.
For over a decade, Rebecca Pritchard was the steady heart of Salvage Hunters. While Drew chased treasures in dusty barns, Rebecca transformed them, turning antiques into gems for millions of viewers. But behind the scenes, the life she built for nearly 30 years was quietly coming apart. From a high-profile divorce to a sudden disappearance from the screen, fans were left wondering where the woman who defined the show had gone. Today, we're uncovering what really happened to Rebecca Pritchard and the new life she's building far from the cameras. The woman who built Salvage Hunters behind the scenes. Salvage Hunters arrived quietly in 2011, but it didn't take long before it found its rhythm. The premise was simple. Follow decorative salvage dealer Drew Pritchard as he crisscrossed Britain, stepping into dusty barns, forgotten workshops, cluttered fairs, and grand old houses in search of overlooked treasures. What viewers saw on screen was the thrill of the hunt. The cold opens in rural driveways, the tense negotiations in echoing warehouses, the moment Drew spotted potential where others saw junk. What they didn't always notice was the second half of the story, the transformation that happened after Drew brought those pieces home. That's where Rebecca Pritchard came in. Rebecca was born on February 19, 1958, in the United Kingdom. Raised in a supportive family environment, she developed an early fascination with antiques and vintage collectibles. She attended private schools, where she excelled academically and cultivated a deep curiosity for history and design. Long before television entered her life, she was already drawn to restoration and property development, learning how spaces and objects carried stories, how worn surfaces could be revived, and how forgotten details could be brought back into relevance. That foundation would quietly shape everything that came later. From the very early seasons, Rebecca became the engine behind Salvage Hunters' success. While Drew handled sourcing and negotiations, Rebecca took charge of restoration and presentation. She repaired broken frames, revived faded finishes, reimagined worn furniture. She brought tired antiques back to life with a careful hand and a sharp eye. Every before and after moment that made viewers lean closer to their screens passed through her workshop first. Their dynamic was clear. Drew chased the finds. Rebecca gave them their future. The series aired on Quest, eventually running for 19 seasons, but its real magic came from that balance. Drew's instinct for discovery paired with Rebecca's ability to see potential where others saw damage. It wasn't flashy, it was practical, creative, and grounded in craft. Over time, audiences began to recognize Rebecca not just as Drew's partner on screen, but as the heart of the operation. She was the one making risky purchases make sense, the one turning rough salvage into sellable gems, the one quietly shaping the visual identity of the show. Behind the camera, the project itself was evolving. The series was officially announced in October 2011 after Discovery Networks International commissioned Cineflix Productions, UK, the British arm of Cineflix, to produce a modern treasure hunting format for Quest. What started as a straightforward antiques program quickly grew into one of the channel's strongest returning series, drawing loyal viewers who came back week after week to watch forgotten objects get a second chance. By the time Season 4 rolled around and the show was renewed for Season 5, things shifted again behind the scenes. Two executives closely tied to Salvage Hunters, Camilla Lewis and Rob Carey, led a management buyout of Cineflix Productions, UK. They went on to launch Curve Media, taking over production of Salvage Hunters and steering the series into its next phase. On screen, the format stayed familiar. Off screen, the business was changing hands. And through all of it, Rebecca remained a constant. When Drew returned with a battered cabinet, he was building value, shaping storylines through transformation, giving emotional weight to each episode's payoff. When Drew returned with a battered cabinet or a chipped mirror, Rebecca was the one who decided what could be saved, what needed reinvention, and what simply wasn't worth the effort. Her workshop became the bridge between discovery and profit, between dusty beginnings and polished endings. For more than a decade, that partnership defined the show. It also defined their lives. Because Salvage Hunters wasn't just a television project for Drew and Rebecca, it was an extension of a relationship that had started long before cameras arrived. They had built a business together, raised children together, developed a shared language around antiques, restoration, and risk. Their on-screen chemistry didn't come from rehearsals. It came from years of working side by side. That history is what made Rebecca's later absence feel so loud. Viewers didn't just notice that Rebecca was gone, they felt it. The restorations changed. The rhythm shifted. The heart of the process seemed quieter. Suddenly, fans were left piecing together fragments. A divorce, a gradual disappearance from the screen. A woman who had helped build one of Britain's most recognizable antiques shows stepped away from the spotlight without explanation. And that silence spoke volumes. Rebecca had never been someone who chased attention. Her role was always about substance, not spectacle, about what happened after the deal, not before it. So when her screen time began to fade, it didn't come with dramatic announcements or emotional goodbyes. It happened the same way she had always worked, quietly, purposefully, on her own terms. Her absence wasn't abrupt, it was gradual, and maybe that made it harder to understand. For years, she had been the steady presence behind Drew's travels, the grounding force in a show built around movement and discovery. Without her, something intangible shifted. Salvage Hunters kept going, but for longtime viewers, it no longer felt quite the same. Rebecca wasn't just part of the cast, she was part of the foundation. So when she finally stepped away, it marked the end of an era, not just for the show, but for a partnership that had shaped its identity from the very beginning. And that's where the real story begins. Because Rebecca Pritchard didn't simply leave a television program. She closed a chapter on a life she helped build, on a business she helped grow, and on a journey that had carried her from quiet workshops to millions of living rooms. What came next would be far more private, far more personal, and far removed from the cameras that once followed every restoration. Drew Pritchard's affair that destroyed his marriage. For years, the marriage between Drew Pritchard and Rebecca Pritchard seemed steady, almost inseparable from the success of Salvage Hunters itself, because they weren't just a couple, they were a system. They had built a business, a television brand, and a shared reputation over nearly 3 decades together. The kind of long history that doesn't happen overnight and doesn't fall apart neatly either. On screen, they looked like a team that understood each other without needing to say much. A quiet rhythm that felt natural, like two people who had done the same dance for years. Off-screen, though, cracks had already begun to form, and the deeper the show grew into a household name, the harder it became to keep the private life truly private. By 2017, everything shifted, and the shift wasn't subtle. Rebecca discovered that Drew had not only been unfaithful, but that the betrayal stretched further than a single mistake. There were multiple women, multiple secrets. The kind of discovery that doesn't just sting, it changes the temperature of everything. The home, the business, the conversations, the silences. And once that door opens, once a partner realizes the story they believed in isn't the full story, it's hard to close it again. What had once been quiet tension inside a marriage became tabloid fuel and local gossip, especially in North Wales, where both were well known, because in places like that, people don't just watch your show, they watch your life. Then came the night that pushed everything into headlines. Late in 2017, inside the Liverpool Arms pub in Conwy, an altercation unfolded that would drag Drew's personal life straight into a courtroom. The kind of situation that takes what's whispered in private and forces it into public record. A man named Janice Bryn Thomas confronted Drew. According to Thomas, Drew smirked at him across the room, and whatever restraint Thomas had left snapped in that moment. In a burst of rage that he later described as uncontrollable, he swung with his left hand. Drew was knocked to the ground, his drink and glasses falling with him, and the scene turned ugly fast, bodies moving, voices rising, and other patrons rushing in to pull Thomas away before it got worse. But the real explosion wasn't the punch. It was what the punch represented, because by the time the case moved to Llandudno Magistrates Court, the story that unfolded wasn't really about two men in a pub. It was about betrayal, humiliation, and a conflict that had been brewing for years. In court, Thomas's defense solicitor, Michael Gray, argued that his client had been provoked, and the details laid out in that room painted a picture far bigger than a single night out. Magistrates heard that Drew had an affair in 2015 with Thomas's wife, Amanda. That allegation alone was heavy, but the story didn't stop at the affair itself. When that relationship ended, it was alleged that Drew contacted her again and suggested their involvement would be made public, a move that, if true, would have kept the wound open long after the affair was supposedly over. Around the same time, Mrs. Thomas reportedly received messages from women described as Drew's other women, and in those messages, she claimed the women blamed her for the breakdown of their own relationships with him, as if the fallout of one affair wasn't enough, as if she was being dragged into the wreckage of several. Eventually, she told her husband about the affair. The couple decided to stay together. Life moved forward, at least on the surface, because that's what people often do when the truth detonates in the middle of a family. You patch what you can. You try to keep your children steady. You convince yourself time will blunt the edges. And for a while, it probably looked like it had, because years passed without Thomas getting revenge, without some dramatic confrontation that turned into a headline. Then, in April of that year, Thomas received another shock, and it landed like a match near dry fuel. Drew allegedly sent Mrs. Thomas a text message that effectively called her husband a coward. The exact wording was shown to magistrates but not released publicly, which only added to the sense that there were layers to this story the public was never going to fully see. 3 months later, on July 8th, the confrontation happened in the pub. And in court, Gray argued that what people were seeing wasn't a long-plotted act of revenge, but an impulsive reaction after years of holding everything in. Gray insisted Thomas had not plotted revenge. He argued that in the 2.5 years after the affair was disclosed, his client could have sought revenge, but didn't. And that was his point, that Thomas had tried to keep his life intact until something pushed him too far. With that latest text message on his mind, and with Drew allegedly smirking and belittling him in the pub, Thomas reacted. The court heard that Thomas, the managing director of a crane company, admitted the charges of common assault and threatening behavior, and the punishment that followed was public and humiliating in its own way. He was fined £960 for the assault and £480 for threatening behavior and banned from every pub in Conway County. A sweeping ban that turned one night into a lasting consequence. And there was a human moment in all of it, one that made it clear this wasn't just a courtroom story. Thomas stood there ashamed, aware that his son and daughter could see him in court, aware that whatever anger had driven him in the pub, the aftermath was now sitting on his family name. He accepted wrongdoing. He acknowledged he had put everything personal to him in jeopardy, as if he could see, in real time, how one impulsive act can ripple into every corner of a life. Drew, on the other hand, described the attack as vicious. He was left with a sore head, a cut on his elbow, and pain in his jaw, injuries that healed, but the unease didn't vanish with the bruises. He said he had been left wary of going out, and he applied for a restraining order against Thomas, though magistrates declined to grant it. The court also heard that a criminal investigation was said to be underway over the alleged text messages, but it wasn't established that they were sent by Drew, which kept the story hovering in that uncomfortable space between allegation and proof, where reputations still take damage even when nothing is fully pinned down. What made the situation even more complicated was how intertwined their lives had become. Drew's son was best friends with Thomas's son, so this wasn't a clean break between strangers. It was a mess that leaked into families, into school runs, into social circles, and into the kind of relationships that don't disappear just because adults have fallen out. And while all of this unfolded in courtrooms and local pubs, the quietest impact may have been inside Rebecca's world, because by then, the trust in her own marriage had already been shattered. The public fight, the headlines, the courtroom details, and the mention of other women all added weight to a relationship that had already fractured. And when a marriage collapses in private, it's painful, but when it collapses under a spotlight, it becomes something else entirely. It becomes humiliation layered on heartbreak. It becomes strangers feeling entitled to the details. It becomes a personal wound turned into public entertainment. The man viewers saw traveling the country hunting antiques was now associated with something far messier than salvage deals. The brand built around craftsmanship and transformation was suddenly tied to betrayal, confrontation, and legal trouble. For Rebecca, who had stood beside him for years helping build that brand, The fallout was not just emotional, it was reputational, it was personal, and it was final, because when the story of your marriage becomes a public spectacle, there's no simple way to step back into the old version of life and pretend it didn't happen. By the end of 2017, the marriage that had once looked unshakable was over. What began as a private affair had spiraled into public humiliation, a physical altercation, and a courtroom reckoning. And for fans watching from home, it marked the moment when Salvage Hunters stopped feeling like just a show about antiques and started feeling like the backdrop to a very real unraveling, the kind that doesn't end when the episode does, the kind that follows you long after the camera's cut. Before the cameras, how Drew and Rebecca Pritchard really met and built Salvage Hunters together. Long before television crews followed him down winding country roads, before dusty barns became weekly destinations, and before Salvage Hunters ever existed, Drew Pritchard and Rebecca Pritchard met the most ordinary way possible. Not through fame, not through antiques fairs, not through television. They met through mutual friends in Wales at a time when Drew was already carving out a name for himself as a driven salvage dealer, obsessed with old buildings, forgotten furniture, and architectural fragments most people walked past without a second glance. Rebecca, meanwhile, was working behind the scenes in business and administration, grounded, organized, and sharp with numbers. Drew was immersed in buying and selling architectural salvage, chasing pieces across the country and building his reputation one deal at a time. Rebecca had a natural talent for structure, planning, and logistics. Where Drew thrived on discovery, Rebecca brought clarity. Where he chased instinct, she handled the details. Their relationship started personally, but it didn't stay there for long. Slowly, Rebecca began helping Drew with paperwork, then valuations, then organizing stock and managing logistics. What started as lending a hand turned into something deeper. She learned antiques alongside him. She learned pricing. She learned restoration. She learned how to spot potential in damaged pieces and how to make numbers work in a business built on risk and instinct. By the time Drew's work caught the attention of producers and Salvage Hunters launched in 2011, Rebecca was already embedded in every part of his operation. So when the cameras arrived, she didn't step into a role. She simply continued doing what she had been doing for years. Drew took to the road, hunting for hidden gems across the UK. Rebecca stayed back at headquarters, handling research, valuations, negotiations, and restoration planning. She became the anchor, the one who made sure purchases made sense, the one who turned rough finds into finished pieces, the one who kept the business running while Drew chased the next lead. Viewers came to know her as the calm presence behind the scenes, the steady voice on the phone, the person who transformed battered furniture into sellable treasures. But what most people didn't realize was that their on-screen dynamic wasn't something learned for television. It was built over years of working side by side. They weren't co-stars first, they were partners first. Together, they raised two children, a son named Tom, born in 1999, and a daughter named Grace. And as Salvage Hunters grew from a modest series into a long-running hit, their family life and business life became deeply intertwined. What audiences saw each week was only the polished version of something that had already been running quietly in the background for a long time. That's why their chemistry always felt natural, why their exchanges never seemed forced, why Rebecca's absence later felt so noticeable. Their story didn't start on camera. It started through friends. It grew through shared work. It deepened through building a business together, and eventually it unfolded in public once the show took off. Even after their marriage ended, they continued working together professionally for a time. That's why the transition on screen felt seamless, even while their personal world was falling apart. The familiarity viewers sensed wasn't performance. It was history, years of partnership, years of building something from scratch, years of learning each other's rhythms. By the time Rebecca eventually stepped away, she wasn't just leaving a television show. She was walking away from a life she had helped create, from a business she helped build, and from a story that had started long before anyone was watching. And that's what makes her exit resonate. Because Salvage Hunters may have introduced Rebecca Pritchard to millions, but her journey with Drew began quietly, far from cameras, shaped by trust, hard work, and a partnership that once felt unbreakable. The day Drew and Rebecca Pritchard's marriage ended. By 2017, the partnership that had powered Salvage Hunters for years was breaking down behind closed doors. After many years together, Drew Pritchard and Rebecca Pritchard officially divorced. Neither of them ever publicly laid out the exact reasons for the split, but the timing lined up with a scandal that had already begun spilling into the open. According to reports from the Daily Mail, Drew was allegedly involved in an affair in 2015 with a married woman named Amanda Thomas. The relationship didn't become public knowledge right away, but when it finally surfaced in 2017, it detonated quietly through Drew and Rebecca's personal lives. What followed wasn't just heartbreak, it became a confrontation. Amanda's husband eventually came face-to-face with Drew in a local pub, where tensions boiled over into a physical altercation that landed in court. During the proceedings, Amanda claimed she had received text messages from women described as Drew's other women, messages in which they allegedly blamed her for the collapse of their own relationships with him. Suddenly, what had once been whispered about privately was being discussed openly in a courtroom. For Rebecca, the timing couldn't have been more painful. After nearly 3 decades of building a life together, raising children, and growing a business side by side, the marriage ended right as Drew's alleged infidelity was being dissected publicly. The antiques world, the local community, and the show's fan base all became unwilling spectators to a deeply personal unraveling. And yet, even after the divorce, something remarkable happened. They kept working together. Rebecca didn't immediately disappear from Salvage Hunters. Professionally, they remained connected. On screen, the dynamic still felt steady, calm, familiar. Most viewers never guessed that the partnership they were watching had already fractured at home. That quiet professionalism only made Rebecca's eventual absence feel more mysterious when it finally came. Then came the rumors. As Rebecca began appearing less frequently, online speculation started to grow. Some fans began suggesting she might be seriously ill. Others assumed there was some hidden medical crisis behind her disappearance. But here's the truth. There has never been a confirmed report, interview, or official statement indicating that Rebecca Pritchard was sick. Rebecca herself has never spoken publicly about any health condition. No reputable outlet has backed up those claims. What spread online wasn't information, it was an assumption. What actually happened is far simpler and far more human. After her divorce from Drew in 2017, Rebecca slowly stepped away from regular on-screen appearances. She shifted her focus toward private business work and personal priorities. She chose distance from the spotlight after one of the most public chapters of her life collapsed. That reduced visibility created a vacuum, and in that silence, fans filled in their own answers. There was no secret illness, there was no hidden medical battle, just a woman choosing privacy. After years of being part of a public partnership, Rebecca quietly reclaimed her personal space. She moved away from the cameras, away from the weekly scrutiny, and back toward a life that didn't require explaining herself to millions of strangers. So when people ask what really happened to Rebecca Pritchard, the answer isn't dramatic. Her marriage ended amid allegations of infidelity. A court case brought uncomfortable details into public view. She stayed professional longer than most would have, and eventually she stepped back. Not because she was sick, because sometimes, after betrayal and public fallout, the bravest thing you can do is walk away quietly and start again somewhere no one is watching. That's the real story behind Rebecca Pritchard's exit. What really happened to Rebecca Pritchard? From Salvage Hunters. For over a decade, Rebecca Pritchard was woven into the fabric of Salvage Hunters. She wasn't the one driving across the country knocking on barn doors. She wasn't the one haggling in muddy farmyards. But she was the constant waiting at the other end of every deal, the steady voice of reason when purchases needed justifying, the one who turned dusty risks into polished returns. Then, in September 2024, something quietly shifted. The official Salvage Hunters Instagram account posted a message thanking Rebecca for more than a decade of salvage hunting and ended it with 3 simple words: "Goodbye, Rebecca." There was no dramatic send-off episode, No extended tribute, no headline announcement in major newspapers. Just that post. Calm, appreciative, final. For viewers who had already noticed her on-screen presence fading, it felt like confirmation of something they had been sensing for a while. Rebecca had been part of the show since its early years. From the moment Drew Pritchard began taking cameras along on his buying trips, Rebecca operated as a central figure behind the scenes. She handled research. She assessed valuations. She managed online sales. She worked through restoration decisions. If Drew brought back a Georgian cabinet or a weathered industrial table, Rebecca was the one calculating whether the numbers made sense and how far a piece could be pushed before profit disappeared. Her role wasn't loud, but it was essential. Over time, however, viewers began to notice small changes. Fewer workshop scenes, fewer discussions at headquarters, less back and forth between Drew and Rebecca. Nothing abrupt, nothing explained, just a gradual thinning of presence. In television, that kind of shift rarely goes unnoticed. By the time the September 2024 farewell message appeared, many fans had already been asking questions. There isn't a documented episode where a title card announces her departure. No major outlet published a headline declaring that she had officially left on a specific date. The Instagram message remains the most direct public acknowledgement that her time as a regular presence on Salvage Hunters had come to an end. But stepping away from television didn't mean stepping away from antiques. Rebecca Pritchard is still active in the world she helped build on screen. According to her professional profile with United Agents, she continues to work as a restoration and valuation expert. That title isn't decorative. It reflects years of hands-on experience, years of assessing pieces others might overlook, years of understanding how condition, provenance, and market appetite intersect. Long before the cameras arrived, Rebecca had already built a foundation in business. Before television fame, she worked in the fashion industry, involved in wholesale retail, and collaborating with companies and designers in London and Hong Kong. That background shaped the way she approached antiques. She understood markets. She understood trends. She understood the presentation. Those skills translated seamlessly into salvage and restoration, where timing and positioning can be just as important as craftsmanship. Beyond consultancy and valuation work, Rebecca has also moved into property development and restoration projects in North Wales. It's a natural evolution. The same eye that once evaluated distressed furniture now assesses entire spaces. The same patience required to restore a weathered table applies to renovating properties that need structural and aesthetic transformation. And perhaps most telling of all, she has chosen to do much of this work away from constant television exposure. After her divorce from Drew in 2017, Rebecca maintained professional involvement in the show longer than many expected. The on-screen dynamic remained composed even when their personal partnership had ended. That professionalism kept the show steady. But over time, the need for distance became clearer. Less screen time, fewer public appearances, a gradual shift back toward private business ventures. When viewers saw less of her, some filled the silence with speculation. Rumors surfaced suggesting health issues. But there has never been any confirmed report, interview, or official statement supporting those claims. No reputable outlet has verified such a narrative. Rebecca herself has never publicly addressed being unwell. What happened is far less dramatic and far more grounded. After years in a public-facing role tied closely to a former marriage, Rebecca chose privacy. She stepped back from being a weekly television presence and leaned into independent projects that didn't require public explanation. That absence created mystery, and mystery online tends to breed theories. But there's no hidden illness story here, no scandal behind the farewell post, just a woman recalibrating her life. For more than a decade, Rebecca Pritchard was part of a brand that blended business with personality. She helped define the tone of Salvage Hunters, balancing Drew's instinct-driven buying style with measured valuation and restoration expertise. When she left, the departure wasn't explosive. It was measured, quiet, controlled. In many ways, that mirrors how she operated on screen. Steady, thoughtful, focused. So what really happened to Rebecca Pritchard from Salvage Hunters? She worked behind the scenes long before cameras rolled. She built a business alongside Drew. She navigated a public divorce without turning it into a spectacle. She remained professional after personal ties ended, and eventually she stepped away from regular television appearances in September 2024, confirmed by the show's own farewell message. Today, she continues working in restoration, valuation, and property development, applying decades of experience in ways that don't require weekly episodes or road trips across Britain. Salvage Hunters may have introduced her to millions, but Rebecca Pritchard's career was never dependent on a camera. It was built on knowledge, instinct, and a willingness to evolve when life demanded it. And sometimes the most powerful exit isn't loud, it's quiet. Were you a fan of Salvage Hunters? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also click the next video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.